guys, so in this video series I covered a whole bunch of different jazz chord voicings. Now playing each one individually is relatively simple and it's a good place to start, but obviously eventually you want to build it up so that you can combine all of these jazz chord voicings into an entire song. And the way you do that is that you take a song, just a simple one to begin with, and then go through it line by line, bar by bar, taking note of the chords, and then the first melody note or the key melody note of each bar. And once you've mapped all of that out, you need to be able to pick chord voicings for that particular chord, whether it's major, minor, dominant, whatever, that has the melody note on top, so that the highest note of the chord voicing is the melody note. Now, in order to do that, you need to have a kind of mental list of all the chord voicings that you know for the different types and qualities of chords, and the highest note, the top note of each chord voicing. So that if you're playing a song and you come across a D minor 7 with an A in the melody, which is the fifth, you know you can play a so what chord voicing. Or again, if you come across a D minor 7 with a G in the melody, which is the 11th, you know you can play a Kenny Barron style chord voicing. Now up here in this picture-in-picture, I've written out many of the chord voicings that I covered in this video series, though not all of them. So really, it's just as simple as memorizing this table or a similar table of a whole bunch of different chord voicings, and then just applying each one to whatever song that you're playing, wherever the melody permits you to have that certain chord voicing. Now, if you're struggling to find an appropriate chord voicing for that particular melody note over this chord, you don't really need to overthink it or make it overly complex. You can just add the melody note on top. So for example, if we have a D minor 7 with a C in the melody, which is the 7th, and you just can't think of a chord voicing that has the 7th at the top, then you can just play any chord voicing really, like for example the so what chord voicing, and then just add the melody note or the 7th or the C on top. Now this is especially useful for simple chord voicings like the 3-note or the open chord voicing, which because of their simplicity lets you put whatever note you like on top. Or if you really get stuck, you can just play a left-hand chord voicing like the Rootless, the Monk or the Powell, Bud Powell chord voicings, and then just play the melody with your right hand. And of course, not every single melody note needs a chord. You can just play a chord, let it ring out, and then play the melody over the top. And I'm going to go through an example at the end of this video where I do exactly that. At the beginning of each bar or each chord change, I choose an appropriate chord voicing that gives me the melody note on top, and then I let sort of the chord just ring out, and I play the melody by itself just with that same chord sustained. Now, subject to finding the appropriate chord voicing where you have the melody note on top, there are a couple of rules you should follow in order to get a really smooth and pleasant sounding chord progression or sort of mix of voicings when you're transitioning between chords. The first rule is to pick the appropriate register for your voicing. Generally, you want to be playing sort of in this middle range here, because if you get too low, a lot of voicings just sound really muddy and unpleasant, and up here, they just sound a bit weak and twinkly. So generally you want to stick to sort of this middle range, but of course some voicings do sound good lower down and some do sound good higher up. And the second rule is to minimize movement between chords. You don't really want to be moving around too much. So for example, if you've got a D minor 7 going to a G7 and you're playing the so what chord voicing for the D minor 7, you generally then don't want to sort of jump up and play like a rootless G7 up here, because then you've lost this sort of lower register down here and you've sort of jumped up a bit. It sounds sort of a bit detached and a bit fragmented. Instead, it'll flow much smoother and sound much nicer if from this D so what chord voicing, to get to the G7, you just moved this C down one semitone and left all the other notes the same, and that gives you a G9. So that's much more sort of logical, and you're not jumping around too much, and it just makes all the chords sort of transition smoothly from one to the next. Now there are a whole bunch of sort of classical voice leading rules for cadences, like, you know, your leading note should go to the tonic, you shouldn't have parallel fifths or octaves, stuff like that. If you know that, great, you can apply it here. If you don't sort of worry too much about it, you don't want to sort of restrict yourself unnecessarily with all these sort of rules. They're more sort of suggestions rather than rules. But in general, the rule is, if you'll excuse the contradiction, that you want to try voice chords so that as few notes have to change as possible, and those notes that do change move as little as possible. But again, like I just said, when I say rules, I mean more suggestions. Feel free to jump around as much as you want. In the end, it's really down to what you think sounds nice and pleasant. So now I'm going to give you an example of how to apply all these different chord voicings to a jazz standard. And as my jazz standard, I'm going to take the song Satin Doll. Now I'm going to play Satin Doll all the way through, start to finish, and I'm going to use all the chord voicings that I've covered in the past lessons in this video series. And I'm going to write out exactly which chord voicing I'm using for every chord up here in the picture-in-picture, so you can sort of follow along. So hopefully you could largely follow what I was doing. As you can see, I generally stayed sort of around this middle register here. I wasn't moving around too much, and it all tended to flow pretty smoothly and sound quite pleasant and nice. Otherwise, thanks for watching, guys. Again, feel free to leave any questions or comments if any of this didn't make sense. Otherwise, cheers. See ya.